beneath his black, shaggy brows, with the cold glitter of the python amid the jungles of Africa. As this formidable being stood motionless, rigid as the Sphinx, with his stony, gorgon-like glare, he was a perfect realization of Beelzebub, hot from pandemonium. "Lieutenant Hamilton," said Elif, rising from his chair, "I take the pleasure in introducing to you Thaumatur Zoron Rinjadra, one of my most tried, faithful, and attached friends, who would lay down his life for me." Then, turning to him, "Thaumatur, this gentleman is an inhabitant of Earth, the guest of the kingdom of Mandal Ultima, an esteemed friend of Prince Altafora. He has honored us with a visit. Bid him welcome." Instantly the whole satanic aspect of this terrible man changed. His eyes beamed with an open and honest expression. His countenance became almost beautiful in its look of kindliness and sincerity. The transformation was so sudden as almost took away my breath. He advanced with a courtly gesture and winning smile. The grasp of his finely shaped hand was warm and hearty. We spent a short time in conversation, conducted on the part of Thaumatur through signs which were interpreted by Elif. "Thaumatur," he said, "our guest has expressed a desire to witness an exhibition of your remarkable powers in occult science. Suppose you could favor us with a materialization of the invisible atoms, molecules, and elements of matter, making them appear in solid, tangible forms, for instance, as in a handsome collation service." Thaumatur bowed, rose from his chair, went to a closet, brought out a metallic box or casket, opened and took from it a long, slender rod of blue-colored metal tipped on the end with a small globe of glittering crystal. Then drew from his breast an immense crystallite, suspended by an amber chain around his neck. The gem was as large as an egg, and glittered with the resplendent hues of the rainbow. He rapidly rubbed the tip of his wand with the green gem several seconds, and the crystal globe began to emit brilliant halos. Then, replacing the crystalline in his bosom, he glided around the room, waved his wand to and fro over his head. Soon a faint misty vapor appeared floating in the air. We drew our chairs to a distance. Waving his wand hither and thither, he guided and collected the vapor in a more dense cloud-like mass over the table, where it rested, undulating like an immense bubble of semi-globular form. Soon it began to glimmer with a faint, luminous golden hue, mingled with streaks of silver, bronze, and alabaster white. The phenomenon was so wonderful and beautiful as it excited my profound astonishment and admiration. "This ethereal nebula, which he has collected and condensed from the atmosphere of this room," said Elif, "contains all the atoms, molecules, and elements, metallic or mineral, of the various substances he will now make appear before us. The solidification and shaping of these elements in separate tangible forms puts his power to severe test." Thaumatur laid down his wand and took another from the box, its handle resembling a rod of glittering steel, its extremity tipped with a spear-point head of unknown metal. He rubbed it with the crystallite, and in a few seconds it glowed with a brilliant light and emitted showers of electrical sparks. He now drew himself up to his full stature. His countenance became rigid and stern. His eyes assumed a fierce and commanding expression. He looked like some incarnated spirit of immense and concentrated power, about to grapple with dark and mysterious forces. Grasping his flaming wand and whirling it around his head, he smote the clouds in all different directions. Every stroke resounded like the report of a pistol. The nebula seemed writhing in agony, as if in the throes of parturition. And suddenly there appeared upon the table, one by one, and miraculously evolved from that floating chaos, fruit dishes of gold, silver, and bronze, vases of alabaster and Parthian marble, of elegant forms and splendid carvings, plates and goblets of rare china or porcelain, and fine-cut decanters of pure crystal. The phenomenon was so tremendous, so appalling, I involuntarily sprang from my chair and drew back. The remnants of the cloud vanished in air. The magician laid down his wand, quietly folded his arms, and looked as nonchalant as if he'd merely tossed off a simple feat of legimendarying. "Examine the service and pronounce upon it," said Elif. I stepped forward, almost trembling, and examined the pieces one by one. "These gold, silver, and bronze dishes," said I, "are perfectly genuine. Their purity and carving are marvelous. The marbles, alabasters, porcelains, and crystals are the finest I ever saw. No such beautiful productions are to be found amongst the most celebrated jewelry or bric-a-brac establishments on earth. How does this part of the performance strike you? Said Elif. I am forcibly struck with the fact that our friend is the swiftest manufacturer of elegant tableware and beautiful ornaments I have ever had the pleasure to meet. And what is equally surprising, he appears to have created them out of nothing. Thaumator bowed in his appreciation of the compliment. Now, Thaumator, order up your refreshments, said Elif. The magician took up his blue wand, and again applying the crystal light to its head, walked around the room, waving it to and fro. Soon another nebulous cloud gradually evolved itself from the air, and settled over the table. It gleamed with a variety of colors, blue, green, yellow, crimson, and white, undulating and intermingling with each other. This nebula, said Elif, contains all the different organic and chemical elements of the various refreshments he will now set before you. Thaumator laid down his fiery javelin, carefully drew from the casket a long, slender, willowy bow, tipped on the end with what seemed to be a small cluster of leaves and buds. It looked so fresh and green, as if just plucked from the tree. He gently stroked the buds and leaves with the crystal light, then waved the bows to and fro through the cloud. One by one, different varieties of fruits appeared in the dishes, and different species of flowers in the vases. Then, dipping the end of the bow in a bowl of water nearby, he sprinkled the cloud, and different varieties of wines appeared in the decanters. As the remnants of the nebula floated away, the magician glanced at us with an interrogatory look, as much to say, Well, gentlemen, how does that dessert please you? Come, Lieutenant, said Elif, let's partake of the refreshing collation. Thaumator has so generously provided for us. We drew our chairs up to the table, and it was with a feeling of awe, almost of terror, that I ventured to place to my lips fruits grown by no process of nature, cultivated by no mortal hand, but evolved as by miracle from the unsubstantiated air. Are any of these fruits indigenous to your terrestrial orchards? He asked. These apples are equal to our best Spitzbergens or Baldwins. These pears are like the finest Bartletts. And these plums remind me of our good green gauges, I replied. And the flowers? I drew from the vases before me. The flowers were of wondrous beauty, and as I inhaled their delicious fragrance, it almost seemed as if they had been newly plucked by spirit hands from the bowers of paradise. These are genuine roses, lilies, and violets, exactly like those of our earthly gardens, though far superior in hue and perfume, I replied. Favor us with your verdict on the wines, said he, as Thaumator filled the glasses from the decanters. As I raised the glass to my lips, one by one, it seemed as if I were tasting materialized nectars from the tables of the gods. They remind me of your choicest brands of Orpoto, Monte Cristo, and Champagne, though immensely superior in all respects, I replied. We drank each other's good healths all around, Thaumator smacking his lips and nodding his head like an upright liquor manufacturer who could honestly avouch the unadulterated purity of his distillations. As variety is the spice of the festive board, as well as many other enjoyments of life, said Elif, suppose we have a little change in the menu. With pleasure, I replied, wondering what new wonder would come next. Have you any choice as to what you would like? I leave the selection to Thaumator, I replied. Thaumator, will you kindly favor us with a variation in the coalition? Said Elif. The magician laid down his bow and drew from the casket a long, three-pronged faucenia, apparently of brass. It resembled the trident of the sea god Neptune. He then rubbed the prongs with the crystal light for several seconds. You will now transmute these fruits, flowers, and liquors into other varieties, said Elif. This task is more difficult than the preceding, for it involves total changes in the molecular chemical relations of the chemical elements contained in these substances. Thaumator's countenance now changed to a stern and commanding expression. His eyes blazed with a terrible light. Every muscle, nerve, and sinew seemed to be strung up to its highest tension, as if preparing to grapple with the organic forces even more potent than those encountered before. Waving aloft his trident, he brought it down with swift strokes, one by one, over the fruits, flowers, and liquors, every blow resounding with loud and sharp reports. The table trembled beneath the electric discharges which shot like flashes of lightning from the prongs of his terrible weapon. This mighty magician looked like some powerful Afrit of the abyss, beneath whose scepter the elements and forces of nature were yielding reluctant submission. And right before my eyes, the apples, pears, plums, roses, lilies, violets, and wines were changing into other varieties. It seemed as if I were looking at a swiftly changing picture of a magic lantern. "Come, Lieutenant," said Elif, "we must compliment Thaumatur by partaking of his frugiferous transmutations." It was several minutes before I could quite recover my composure at this stupendous exhibition of diablerie. Finally, summoning courage, I drew my chair up to the table, and we proceeded to discuss the new menu en règle. "Kindly favor us with your opinion," said Elif. "These oranges," said I, "are equal to our finest Indian River Floridas. These peaches are quite up to our best Jerseys, and these grapes remind me of our choicest Californians. And the flowers? These honeysuckles, buttercups, and daisies are exactly like those I've often plucked in my native fields. And the liquors?" Thaumatur now filled several glasses from the decanters. "I beg your Excellency's pardon, but having had the pleasure of drinking to your good health in such delicious wines, 'twould be nothing less than an insult to jolly Bacchus were I to wind up with this cold tea, lemonade, and water gruel." "Really, Thaumatur," said Elif, glancing at the glasses, "you appear to have become a teetotaler. Your change of sentiment on the temperance question is as rapid as your change of nutrient." Thaumatur shrugged his shoulders with a grim smile and pointed to the wall on the opposite side of the room. "Oh, I see. You don't wish to throw your temptations in the way of your corps of waiters, a very proper precaution in view of their bilious proclivities. I fear they will be sadly disappointed. You may as well call the frisky little rascals up to clear the cloth. The lieutenant and I propose to have a quiet chat about philosophy and other subjects we know nothing about." Thaumatur stepped across the room to the wall, tapped thrice with his wand, and without the slightest apparent separation to the wall, out walked a dozen or more little creatures about a foot high, looking like dwarves, trolls, and pixies out of our fairy tales. They had jolly round faces, twinkling eyes, hawk or snub noses, round fat little bellies, and spindle shanks, knock-kneed or bow-legged. They were attired in motley costumes and tall peaked hats. At a signal from Thaumatur, they performed a dwarf dance, which was so irresistibly impish and comical, we were almost convulsed with laughter. They then hopped on the table and proceeded to regale themselves with refreshments, which they did with great gusto. They inspected the glasses, decanters, evidently expecting something nice and cheerful, but turned up their nose emphatically at the cold tea and water gruel, and seemed dreadfully disappointed. At a sign from Thaumatur, they selected buttonhole bouquets from the flowers, pinned them on their bosoms, shouldered the empty dishes, vases, etc., flung the contents of the decanter into a bowl, clambered down the table legs, marched in single file to the wall, within which they all disappeared, like the unsubstantial pageant of a dream. "How do Thaumatur's exhibitions compare with those of your terrestrial magicians?" asked Elif. "I confess that the most renowned sorcerers of old Egypt or India have witnessed a tenth a part of these wonders. They would have given up the ghosts in despair, and our distinguished Friedel, Decoa, Houdini, and Herriman would consign their whole diablerie paraphernalia to the flames and take to punch and Judy shows for a livelihood." "These are only a few of his more pleasing exhibitions. On great occasions he can display the most tremendous manifestations of the occult art," said he. Thaumatur rose to take his departure, as Elif and I expressed our thanks for the delightful entertainment. He took my hand, closely examined the lines of my palm, then looked earnestly in my face. His wonderful eyes seemed to read me through and through. "Thaumatur is a clever soothsayer," said Elif, "and will tell you your fortune, if you like." "I confess I am not altogether exempt from the natural curiosity of mortals to pry into the books of the fate," I replied. "Give him the date of your birth. He will then ascertain what star was in ascendant on your planet at that time." "August the 20th, 1866, terrestrial time, the date of the proclamation of the President of the United States of America declaring the war for the Union was at an end." On that glorious day, all the stars of the American flag were in ascendance, and all the sons of liberty and union shouted for joy. Truly a splendid galaxy to be born under, and a glorious day to be born in, said Elif. A man ought to be proud of such a natal day. So I am, proud of it as our glorious 4th of July. But I'm surprised to hear that you had a war in your great republic. Sorry to say, a family quarrel will sometimes spring up in the best regulated families, you know. Pretty tough fight on both sides, lasted 4 years, but it's all over, and we are a more closely united band of brothers than ever, and pay strict obedience and loyalty to Uncle Sam. And 'tis to be hoped you'll always remain so. You may be quite sure of it, I replied. Thaumator went to the closet, took out a celestial globe on which were depicted constellations, stars, and planets of the heavens, drew from his pocket a small book printed with cabalistic characters and geometric symbols, studied the globe and book for several moments, drawing up a rapid calculation on his tablet, conversed with Elif for a few moments by signs, then shaking me warmly by the hand, left the room. He has calculated the horoscope of your fortune for a short time to come, said Elif. And as I am in the interested party, Your Excellency, will you please communicate the same to me, I replied. You have met with many surprising adventures during your brief sojourn on this planet, as people expect to meet who take trips to other worlds other than their own. More surprising ones await you. I hope they will be of a stirring character. You will enjoy a lively adventure with a royal personage in which your temper and steel will be tested. My steel was tested at the U.S. government sword factory. My temper is generally of a quiet character, but if tested too far, may become rather testy. You will be in danger of death, but just in the nick of time you will receive an ardent declaration of love from a beautiful princess. This is a surprise indeed. Death and love meeting together. The arrival of love on the scene is quite opportune. They will probably have a fight over me. Love will conquer, for love is stronger than death. There will be an elopement. How delightfully romantic. A flight over sea. Splendid, magnificent. Come over the sea, maiden, with me, mine though sunshine and storm and snows. Seasons may roll, but the true soul burns the same wherever it goes. Go ahead. But she's no maiden. Great Scott! She's a married woman. Angels and ministers of grace defend us! You will encounter, oh, I know it's coming, exactly, you needn't say it. What? An injured husband, pistol, coffee, damages. But Thaumator didn't say that. It's bound to come. Anyhow, surer than fate, in spite of Thaumator or any other fortune-teller. Well, what do you propose to do about it? When does this thrilling amatory and sanguinary tragedy begin? Date specified? This evening. Short notice. However, I will endeavor to be in readiness to meet, like a brave man, whatever fate has in store for me. To while away the interim, we discovered on various subjects appertaining to occult philosophy, the natural and spiritual world, the mysterious laws and forces prevailing in those worlds, the relations existing between mind and matter. Did it ever occur to you, said Elif, that what we call the laws of nature are but the manifest workings of spiritual beings? I replied that the hypothesis was a favorite one with many highly cultivated minds in our world, was a reaction against gross materialism, was not denied by many scientific men, and was also the foundation of many charming and beautiful poetic conceptions. The time will come, continued he, when gross materialism will be swept away and your world will be awakened to the true philosophy of close relations existing between the material and spiritual world. Every kingdom and department of nature is under the control of spiritual intelligence of different ranks and stations. All the phenomenon of life, birth, growth, and nourishment, every seed that germinates, every flower that blooms, and every plant that bears fruit are under the direct control of these invisible beings. In short, all the wondrous and varied phenomenon of nature are under the government of myriad spiritual intelligences. The powers they wield are various in degree and manifestations. Some are kindly, pleasant, and attractive. Others are unfriendly, inimical to man. Some are gigantic and terrible in their manifestations. Others are almost of a satanic or infernal character, permitted so to be in order to fulfill the mysterious designs of the Almighty. Over many of these spiritual intelligences I have control, and can cause them to appear in forms visible to the bodily eye. I will now bring before you some of the more pleasing of these beings who have charge over the flowery kingdom of nature.